Hello everybody, I would like to welcome you to our third video in the Pre-Algebra playlist, and in this video we will go over subtracting integers. So let's get started. Again, just like the last video, I will use a red circle here to represent -1, and I will use a blue circle here to represent +1. So let's start us off with an example here. In this example, we will find what the answer to -9 minus -3 equals to. Before we begin the solution to this problem, we can loosely translate the subtraction sign, which is this minus right here, as this. Okay? We can represent this problem verbally as something as you having -9, then I am taking away -3 from you, so what are you left with? So, let's draw circles to help us solve this problem. I will draw 9 red circles to represent -9, and then I will take away 3 of those circles to represent me taking away -3. So here's what we get. So here are my 9 circles. And in order to represent me taking away -3, I simply take out 3 of the 9 red circles that you have. So after I take out the 3 negative circles that you have, you are left with 6 red circles, meaning your answer is -6. Okay, now let's move on. Now, before we do any more examples, I would like to go over some rules that are related to subtracting integers. Let's go over the first rule. The first rule is pretty much like this. Now, all this rule really means is that if I have some number, and then I denote that number as this right here, number 1, and I have another number, but in this case, that number is a negative number, which is represented as negative number 2 over here, and if I'm adding those two numbers together, that is the same thing as saying number 1 minus number 2. An example of this is this. Let's say I have something like 5 plus -4. I can represent this problem over here, which is 5 plus -4, as this over here, and then I will still get the same exact answer of 1. Okay? So this is what this rule over here means. Now let's go over another rule. All this rule really tells us is that if I have some number and then I'm subtracting from that some number another negative number, I can rewrite that same expression as number 1 plus number 2. So basically, if I have two negatives right next to each other, such as I do in this problem, they turn into a positive. This is generally what people mean when they say two negatives make a positive. So let's do an example of that problem right here. If I have something like -6 minus -5, I can write this as this. Or, more simply, I can rewrite that as this. And then, that would give me the answer of -1. So right now, I would like to go over 3 more rules, but this time, these rules relate to the sign of the answer. The first rule tells me that if I have some number, and from that number I'm subtracting another number, the answer's sign will depend on the integer which has the greatest absolute value in the problem. So this is what I mean when I said that first rule. Now let's do an example of this problem. Let's say I have something like 5 minus 9. In order to determine what the sign of my answer will be, all I need to do is take the absolute value of the two numbers that are present in the problem. Absolute value of 5 is 5, and we know that the absolute value of 9 is 9. And since 9 is greater than 5, the answer's sign will be the same sign that is in front of the 9. And since the sign in front of the 9 is negative, the answer will have a negative sign. Now let's move on to the second rule. This rule tells me that if I have a negative number, and from that number I'm subtracting another positive number, then the answer's sign will always be a negative. Now let's do an example of this scenario. Let's say I have something like -5, and from that number I'm subtracting +4. my answer will be a negative. Specifically, my answer will be -9. Now let's go over one more rule. Now what this rule tells me is that if I have some negative number, and from that some negative number, I'm subtracting another negative number, the sign of the answer will be positive if the absolute value of the negative number 2 is bigger than that of the absolute value of negative number 1. Now let's do a simple example of this problem. Let's say I have the problem -5 minus -6. What will be the sign of my problem? I know that the absolute value of -5, which in this case is negative number 1, is 5. At the same time, I also know that the absolute value of -6 is 6. And since this is the case, the absolute value of the negative number 2 is greater than that of the absolute value of negative number 1. And according to this rule, this tells me that the sign of my answer will be a positive. Now we have done enough examples when it comes to single-digit subtraction with integers. Now let's do a couple examples with 2-digit subtraction, then we'll move on to 3-digit subtraction, and we'll end this video on a high note when we do a 4-digit subtraction example. So let's begin by doing 2-digit subtraction. Let's say I have something like, what is the answer to 66 minus 39? I write this answer in the same manner as I set up the addition problem. The only difference is that instead of writing a plus here to symbolize addition, I write a negative over here to symbolize subtraction. So now let's get to work. I start off again with my rightmost digits. In this case, these digits are 6 and 9. So what I do is that I take 6 and from it I subtract -9. As you may know, I get an answer of -3 when I do this, but I don't simply write down a -3 over here. When it comes to subtraction, there are a few different steps that are required. Since the number on the top is smaller than the number on the bottom, what I need to do is that I need to add 10 to the number on the top. In this case, 6 plus 10 will give me 16. So I write down 16 on top of the 6. Now, this is equivalent of saying that I borrowed 10 things from the tens place number. In this case, the tens place number is the 6. So, since I borrowed 10 from the 6 over here, that is the same thing as saying that I borrowed 10 from the 60 over here. So I cancel the 6 over here, and then I subtract 1 from it and write the answer on the top. So 6 minus 1 is 5, so I write that on the top. And now I continue on as I would before. So I have 16 on top of the 9. So if I do 16 minus 9, that gets me 7, and I write 7 right below it. Now I have 5 on the top instead of a 6, and so I take away 3 from it, and that gets me 2. So I write down the 2 right below it. Let's do another example to clarify. Let's say I have something like 78 minus 49. Since 8 is bigger than 9, I need to add 10 to it to give me 18 on the top. Since I borrowed 10 things from the 70 over here, I have to put a 6 on top of it because 7 minus 1 will give me 6. So I continue on now. 18 minus 9 will give me 9, and 6 minus 4 will give me 2. So my answer is 29. Let's say I have something like 27 minus 18. Since the top is smaller than the bottom, I need to add 10 to it to give me 17. The next thing that I need to do is that I need to subtract 1 from the 2 over here. So that gets me 1. So I write the 1 on the top over here. Now I can continue on like normal. 17 minus 8 will give me 9. And then the 1 minus the 1 will give me a 0. So this gives me my final answer of 9. Now let's move on to 3-digit subtraction. Let's do an example. And in this example, let's say I have something like 368 minus 9. Now, we do the same thing as we did in 2-digit subtraction. Since the number on the top is smaller than the number on the bottom, in this case 8 is smaller than 9, I need to add 10 to it to give me 18. And then I subtract 1 from the 6 over here to give me a 5 on the top. Now I can continue normally. 18 minus 9 will give me 9. 5 minus nothing over here, which is the same thing as saying a 0, will give me a 5. And I can carry down the 3 right below because it's the same thing as saying 0 right below the 3. So my answer is 359. Let's do another example with 3-digit subtraction. Let's say I have something like 589 minus 258. Since the 9 over here is bigger than 8, I don't need to take anything away from the 9. So 9 minus 8 will simply give me 1. 8 minus 5 will simply give me 3. And 5 minus 2 will simply give me 3. So there's my answer. Let's do one more example with 3-digit subtraction. Let's say I have something like 387 minus 298. In this case, the 7 is smaller than the 8, so I need to add 10 to it to give me 17. Now, I need to take away 1 from the 8 to give me a 7 on the top. Now I can do 17 minus 8 to give me 9. Now, I cannot really do 7 minus 9 because that will give me a negative number. So I need to add 10 to it to give me 17 again, and take away 1 from the 3 to give me 2 on the top. Now I can proceed. 17 minus 9 will give me 8, and 2 minus 2 will give me 0. So this is my answer. My answer is 89. Let's do one example with 4-digit subtraction before I leave you in this video. So let's get straight to the example. And let's say I have something like 5,486, from which I'm subtracting 4,798. So, since 6 is smaller than the 8, I need to add 10 to it and take 1 away from the 8. So this gives me 16 over here and 7 over here. Now 16 minus 8 will give me 8. And 7 minus 9 will give me a negative 2. Since I cannot have any negatives in the bottom, I need to add a 10 to here to give me a 17 and take away 1 from here to give me a 3. Since 17 minus 9 is 8 and 3 minus 7 is a negative 4, I need to add 10 over here to give me 13 and take 1 away from the 5 to give me a 4. Now 13 minus 7 is 6 and 4 minus 4 is 0. So here's my answer. My answer is 688. So I hope you learned a lot from this video, and I hope you keep on working hard, and I'll see you in the next video.